My name is Rachel Bennett. I am 37 years old. Until last Saturday, I believed there was nothing my family could do that would truly surprise me. I was wrong. Because at exactly 4:18 that afternoon, my older sister looked me in the eyes and chose a stranger's pride over her own sister's dignity. It happened so fast that nobody reacted. 1 second I was carrying a birthday cake toward the backyard. The next, the cake was on the ground. Pink frosting splashed across the patio. The candles rolled beneath the picnic table. And a man's hand had just struck my face so hard that my ears were ringing. For a moment, nobody moved. Children stopped laughing. Someone dropped a paper cup. Even the music playing from the speakers seemed strangely distant. I slowly raised my fingers to my cheek. It burned. I tasted blood inside my mouth. Then my brother-in-law smiled. Not because he was sorry. Because he expected me to apologize. I looked toward my sister. She had seen everything. Every single second. She knew I hadn't done anything wrong. I waited for her to say something. Anything. Instead, she folded her arms. Rachel, just say you're sorry. I stared at her. Sorry? He hit me. Her face didn't change. You embarrassed my husband in front of everyone. You should apologize. That was the exact moment something inside me broke. Not because of the slap. Because I finally understood. I had spent years protecting people who would never protect me. So I quietly placed the ruined cake box on the table, picked up my purse, and walked away. Nobody followed me. Nobody stopped me. Behind my back, someone laughed. But less than 3 hours later, a black luxury sedan stopped in front of my sister's house. 3 people stepped out. One carried a leather briefcase. Another carried official legal documents. The third carried a brand new set of house keys. And before the sun went down, everything my family believed belonged to them would disappear. The birthday party had started just after noon. It was my nephew Ethan's 10th birthday. Every year, I was the first person to arrive. Not because anyone asked me. Because if I didn't help, nothing was ever ready on time. That morning had been no different. By 8 o'clock I was already at my sister Lauren's house. I inflated balloons until my fingers hurt. I carried folding tables from the garage. I arranged decorations. I picked up the custom birthday cake from the bakery. When Lauren called 2 days earlier saying money was tight, I quietly paid for the cake myself. She promised she would pay me back. She never did. She almost never did. But I stopped expecting it years ago. By lunchtime, the backyard looked beautiful. Colorful balloons floated above every table. Children ran across the grass. Neighbors complimented the decorations. Lauren accepted every compliment with a smile. Thank you. I worked so hard. I simply smiled. Nobody mentioned that I had done almost everything. That wasn't unusual. I had become invisible a long time ago. Around 3 in the afternoon, Lauren's husband, Eric, finally came outside. He had spent most of the day watching television while everyone else worked. He grabbed a drink from the cooler, looked around the yard, then nodded once. Looks decent. Lauren laughed as though he had just said something charming. I looked away. Eric always found a way to make everyone around him feel smaller. Especially me. It wasn't obvious at first. Years earlier, his insults sounded like jokes. Still single? Maybe you're just too picky. Working another weekend? No wonder nobody wants to date you. You always try too hard. Relax for once. Whenever I looked uncomfortable, Lauren would smile. Oh, that's just Eric. He doesn't mean anything. Eventually, everyone else started saying the same thing. He's just joking. Don't take it personally. Little by little, respect disappeared. Not all at once. One small insult at a time. I kept telling myself staying quiet kept the family together. Now, I know silence only protects the bully. Around 4 o'clock everyone gathered for Ethan to blow out his candles. I carefully carried the birthday cake across the patio. Children surrounded the table. Parents lifted their phones to record. I smiled when Ethan saw the cake. His eyes lit up. He loved dinosaurs. The bakery had covered the entire cake with tiny green dinosaurs made from icing. As I stepped around one of the chairs, someone backed into me. It happened so quickly I barely had time to react. The cake tilted. I tried to save it, but it slipped from my hands. The box hit the ground. The cake flipped upside down. Bright green frosting exploded across the stone patio. Before I could even speak, Eric shouted, "What the hell is wrong with you?" I looked down. Someone bumped into me. He didn't even check. He didn't ask what happened. He simply walked toward me. Fast. His face twisted with anger. "You ruined my son's birthday." It was an accident. Then, without warning, his hand slammed across my face. The sound echoed through the backyard. Everything stopped. I nearly lost my balance. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. I looked directly at Lauren. She had seen everything. So had everyone else. My cheek burned. Tears filled my eyes. Not from pain. From disbelief. Eric pointed toward the mess on the ground. "Clean it up." His voice was calm now. Almost satisfied. "You always create problems." I whispered. "I didn't do anything." Lauren finally stepped forward. For one brief second, I thought she was coming to help me. Instead, she stood beside her husband. "If you hadn't been careless, this never would have happened." I stared at her. "You watched him hit me." She avoided my eyes. "Rachel, don't ruin Ethan's birthday." The words hit harder than the slap. I slowly looked around the backyard. My aunt lowered her head. 2 cousins stared at the ground. An uncle quietly picked up a paper plate. Nobody defended me. Nobody even asked if I was okay. I realized something painful. Sometimes, the people who stay silent cause just as much damage as the person who throws the first blow. I picked up my purse. "I think it's time for me to leave." Eric laughed. Finally. Lauren crossed her arms. "Maybe next time you'll think before embarrassing us." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. As I reached my car, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. "Miss Rachel Bennett?" A calm professional voice spoke. "Yes. This is Jonathan Hayes from Hayes Morrison Estate Attorneys. I apologize for contacting you on a weekend. But your grandfather specifically instructed our office to reach you immediately if a certain situation ever occurred." I frowned. "What situation?" There was a short silence. Then the attorney asked one question. "Miss Bennett, did someone in your family physically assault you today?" I stopped breathing. "Yes." The attorney's voice became quieter. I was afraid of that. He believed this day might eventually come. My fingers tightened around the phone. "What are you talking about?" "Your grandfather left detailed legal instructions that become effective the moment abuse against you can be verified." I looked back toward my sister's house. People were already laughing again. as if nothing had happened. The attorney spoke once more. "I believe it's time we meet." And at that moment, for the first time that day, I realized my grandfather had seen something in this family, long before anyone else did. Rachel sat inside her car for several minutes without starting the engine. The backyard was still visible through the windshield. Children laughed. Music played. Someone carried another dessert to the table as if the ruined birthday cake had never mattered. As if a woman hadn't been slapped in front of an entire family. Rachel rested her forehead against the steering wheel. Her cheek still throbbed. But the pain on her face was nothing compared to the ache in her chest. She wasn't crying because Eric had hit her. She was crying because Lauren had watched it happen. And chosen him. After several deep breaths, Rachel started the car and drove away. The streets were quiet. Every red light gave her another chance to see the faint handprint on her cheek in the rearview mirror. She looked away every time. 40 minutes later, she pulled into the driveway of her small townhouse. The silence inside the house felt strangely comforting. No shouting. No insults. No pretending everything was fine. She placed her purse on the kitchen counter and slowly walked into the living room. A framed photograph sat on the bookshelf. It showed Rachel standing beside her grandfather, William Bennett. He was smiling proudly with one hand resting on her shoulder. She picked up the frame. "I wish you were still here." Her voice cracked. "You always knew what to say." She smiled sadly. Then another memory surfaced. 5 years earlier. After William had undergone heart surgery. Lauren had visited him only twice. Eric hadn't visited at all. Both of them always had an excuse. Work. Traffic. The kids. Something always seemed more important. Rachel never complained. Every evening after finishing work, she drove across town to his house. She cooked dinner. Organized his medications. Cleaned the kitchen. Paid bills online whenever he became confused. Sometimes they simply sat on the porch together, watching the sunset without speaking. Those quiet evenings became his favorite part of the week. One night he looked at her and smiled. "You've always had the kindest heart in this family." Rachel laughed. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." William slowly shook his head. "No. You are doing what everyone should do." At the time, she didn't fully understand what he meant. Now, his words echoed inside her mind. Her phone buzzed again. The same number. Rachel answered immediately. "Miss Bennett. This is Jonathan Hayes again. I've arranged a meeting for 6 o'clock this evening. Our office is still open. I believe it would be best if we discussed everything in person." Rachel hesitated. "I honestly don't think I can deal with legal matters today." "I understand. But your grandfather specifically instructed us not to delay if this situation ever occurred." She closed her eyes. "All right. I'll be there." An hour later, Rachel walked into the law office. The receptionist greeted her warmly before leading her into a large conference room. Jonathan Hayes stood as she entered. He appeared to be in his early 60s. Calm. Professional. Kind. His eyes immediately noticed the fading mark on Rachel's cheek. "I'm very sorry." He waited until she sat down. Then quietly placed a thick file on the table. Across the front, one name was printed in black letters. William Bennett Estate. Rachel looked at it with confusion. "I thought everything had already been settled months ago." Jonathan nodded. "It was. But your grandfather created additional legal instructions that were not to be explained unless certain conditions were met." Rachel frowned. "What conditions?" Jonathan opened the file. There were 3. The first. If you voluntarily gave up your legal rights. You never did. The second, if your sister and her husband violated the occupancy agreement. Rachel slowly looked up. Occupancy agreement? Jonathan folded his hands. The house your sister lives in. It doesn't belong to Lauren. Rachel blinked. What? It legally belongs to you. The room fell silent. Rachel stared at him. I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong file. Jonathan calmly slid several certified documents across the table. The deed. The probate order. The property transfer. Everything was legally recorded 6 months ago. Rachel looked at the first page. There it was. Owner. Rachel and Bennett. She couldn't speak. My grandfather. Left me the house? Jonathan nodded. Yes. Rachel shook her head. But Lauren told everyone Grandpa wanted her to have it because she had children. Jonathan gave a small, understanding smile. That is what your sister believed. But it wasn't true. Rachel's heart raced. Why didn't Grandpa tell anyone? Jonathan looked toward the window for a brief moment before answering. Because he feared exactly what happened today. Rachel remained silent. Jonathan continued. Your grandfather loved both of his granddaughters. He wanted Lauren and Eric to have a place to live while they became financially secure. So he created an occupancy agreement. They were allowed to stay in the house. But ownership remained entirely yours. Rachel looked down at the documents again. None of this felt real. Jonathan opened another folder. This agreement also included several conditions. He turned one page toward her. Rachel read the highlighted paragraph. Occupancy would immediately terminate if Rachel Bennett became the victim of physical violence, intimidation, harassment, or repeated abusive behavior by either occupant. She stopped reading. Her hands began shaking. Jonathan quietly spoke. Your grandfather insisted on that clause. Rachel whispered. He expected this? Jonathan sighed. He hoped he was wrong. But he wasn't willing to take the chance. Rachel leaned back in her chair. 4 years. She had hidden Eric's insults. She had ignored Lauren's excuses. She had convinced herself everything would eventually improve. Apparently. Her grandfather had seen the truth long before she did. Jonathan carefully closed the file. There is something else. Rachel looked at him. Several members of your family have already contacted our office. She frowned. What do you mean? A few witnesses reached out after today's incident. They wanted to know whether your grandfather's legal instructions were still enforceable. Rachel looked surprised. Who? Jonathan glanced at his notes. Your Aunt Susan. Your Uncle David. 2 cousins. And he paused. Your younger brother, Michael. Rachel couldn't hide her surprise. Michael called? Jonathan nodded. He told us he regretted staying silent. He said he should have stepped between you and Eric. Rachel slowly lowered her eyes. For the first time that day, someone in her family had admitted the truth. Jonathan folded his hands once more. Miss Bennett. There is enough evidence to enforce the agreement immediately. Rachel looked out the window. The sun was beginning to set. Somewhere across town, Lauren and Eric were probably laughing about what had happened. Certain there would be no consequences. Jonathan finally asked the question that changed everything. If you authorize us tonight, we can begin the legal process immediately. Rachel stared silently at her grandfather's signature on the final page. For the first time since the slap, she realized this wasn't about revenge. It was about finally respecting the woman her grandfather had always believed she could become. Rachel didn't answer immediately. The conference room became completely silent. The ticking of the wall clock sounded louder than ever. She kept staring at her grandfather's signature. The familiar handwriting brought back memories she hadn't thought about in years. William Bennet had never been a man of dramatic speeches. He believed actions revealed a person's true character. When Rachel was a teenager, he often told her the same thing. Kindness is a strength. But kindness without boundaries becomes permission. At the time, she hadn't understood what he meant. Now, she finally did. Jonathan patiently waited. There is no pressure. Miss Bennet, this decision is entirely yours. Rachel took a slow breath. If I do this, my sister will lose her home. Jonathan nodded honestly. Yes. She closed her eyes. And her children? They will have time to relocate under the terms outlined in the agreement. There will be no immediate eviction tonight. The process will be handled legally and respectfully. Rachel looked relieved. I don't want the children to suffer. Jonathan smiled gently. Your grandfather said you would probably say that. Rachel looked surprised. He knew me that well? Jonathan opened another envelope. He left you a personal letter. He instructed us not to deliver it unless today's agreement was ever activated. Rachel carefully accepted the envelope. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. Her grandfather's handwriting covered the front. For Rachel. Only if the hardest day finally arrives. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. My dear Rachel, if you are reading this, then my greatest fear has become reality. Someone has mistaken your kindness for weakness. I pray I was wrong. But if I wasn't, please remember something. You are not responsible for protecting people who refuse to protect you. I have watched you give this family your time, your money, your patience, and your heart. You never kept score. You never asked for recognition. You simply loved people. That is why I trusted you with this home. Not because you needed a reward. Because I knew you would protect what truly mattered. A house is only wood and stone. A home is built by respect. If respect disappears, the home disappears with it. Do not feel guilty for enforcing the agreement. I wrote those conditions. Not you. If someone chooses violence instead of gratitude, they have already made the decision themselves. Live your life without fear. And never apologize for demanding the respect every human being deserves. I will always be proud of you. Love. Grandpa. Rachel couldn't stop the tears. One drop landed on the paper. Then another. Jonathan quietly handed her a box of tissues. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Finally, Rachel folded the letter with great care. He always believed in me. Jonathan smiled. He spoke about you often. He once told me something I'll never forget. Rachel looked up. He said, the strongest person in my family is the one who never raises her voice. Rachel smiled through her tears. That sounds exactly like him. Jonathan nodded. It does. Another few minutes passed. Rachel wiped her eyes. Then looked directly at the attorney. What happens now? Jonathan opened another folder. Our office already prepared the paperwork. We were simply waiting for your decision. Rachel slowly nodded. I don't want revenge. I don't want anyone humiliated. I only want the agreement. Followed. Jonathan replied immediately. And that's exactly what will happen. He slid one final document across the table. If you sign here, we'll begin tonight. Rachel picked up the pen. She stared at the signature line. 4 years. She had accepted insults, ignored disrespect, pretended everything was fine. Every holiday, every birthday, every family dinner. She had sacrificed pieces of herself just to keep everyone else comfortable. Not anymore. Without another word, She signed. Jonathan witnessed the signature, then carefully closed the file. I'll personally oversee everything. Rachel stood. Thank you. No. Jonathan smiled kindly. Thank your grandfather. He planned this years ago. Across town. The birthday party was finally ending. Guests gathered their bags and coolers. Children climbed into their parents' cars. The laughter sounded forced now. Nobody mentioned Rachel. But almost everyone was thinking about her. Aunt Susan quietly approached Uncle. David. I can't stop thinking about what happened. David sighed. Neither can I. We should have stopped him. Susan nodded. I've never seen Eric hit anyone before. David looked toward the backyard. I have. Susan stared at him. What? David lowered his voice. 3 years ago. They argued inside the garage. I heard something break. When Lauren came back outside. She had a bruise on her wrist. Susan's face turned pale. Why didn't you say anything? David looked ashamed. Because Lauren told everyone she slipped. And I wanted to believe her. Nearby. 2 cousins were having their own conversation. I can't believe nobody defended Rachel. I know. She paid for today's birthday cake. What? Lauren said she bought it. No. Rachel did. The cousin looked down. She always does. One uncomfortable truth after another slowly spread through the family. People began remembering things they had ignored for years. Eric's cruel jokes. Lauren making excuses. Rachel. Always staying silent. The pattern suddenly became impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Eric loaded the last cooler into the SUV. He slammed the trunk shut. See? I told you. Rachel loves playing the victim. Lauren forced a weak smile. Maybe we should call her tomorrow. Eric laughed. For what? She'll get over it. She always does. Lauren didn't answer. For the first time in years. She wasn't completely sure he was right. As they drove home, neither of them noticed the black luxury sedan already parked quietly 2 streets away. Inside, Jonathan Hayes checked his watch. The legal courier sat beside him. A licensed locksmith waited in another vehicle. Everything was ready. Jonathan looked at the signed authorization one final time. Then calmly said, It's time. The 3 vehicles slowly started their engines and headed toward the house Lauren and Eric still believed was theirs. The sun had almost disappeared below the horizon when Lauren turned onto her street. She frowned. There are cars in front of the house. Eric barely looked up from his phone. Probably the neighbors. But as they pulled closer, Lauren noticed something unusual. A black luxury sedan was parked directly in front of their driveway. Behind it stood a white legal courier vehicle. Another van with the logo of a licensed locksmith waited at the curb. 3 people stood quietly near the front walk. One man wore a tailored navy suit and carried a leather briefcase. A second held a thick-sealed envelope. The third rested one hand on a metal toolbox. Lauren felt a knot form in her stomach. Eric. I don't think they're here by accident. Eric laughed confidently. They've definitely got the wrong address. He parked the SUV and stepped out. Can I help you? The man in the navy suit smiled politely. Good evening. My name is Jonathan Hayes. I'm an attorney representing the legal owner of this property. Eric frowned. The legal owner? Yes. Lauren exchanged a confused look with him. There has to be some mistake. Jonathan remained calm. Before we continue, may I confirm your identities? I'm Eric Bennett. And this is my wife, Lauren Bennett. Jonathan nodded once. Thank you. He accepted the sealed envelope from the legal courier, then handed it directly to Eric. You'll need to read the first page before entering the house. Eric rolled his eyes. This is ridiculous. He tore open the envelope. Lauren leaned closer. What is it? Eric unfolded the first document. His confident expression slowly disappeared. Printed across the top were the words, Notice of Termination of Occupancy Agreement. He frowned. What occupancy agreement? Lauren took the papers from his hands. The first paragraph made her stop breathing. Legal owner. Rachel and Bennett. No. She whispered. No. This can't be right. Jonathan quietly opened his briefcase. There is no mistake. He placed several certified documents on the hood of the SUV. The recorded deed. The probate order. The signed occupancy agreement. Lauren's hands began shaking. She recognized her grandfather's signature immediately. So did Eric. Neither of them spoke. Jonathan finally broke the silence. Your grandfather transferred ownership of this property to Miss Rachel Bennett 6 months before his passing. Lauren looked up. He told me. He wanted me to have this house. Jonathan answered carefully. He wanted you to live here. He never transferred ownership. Lauren's eyes filled with tears. She remembered something. Months earlier, her grandfather had asked Rachel to drive him downtown. Eric had joked. There goes Grandpa's favorite granddaughter again. Rachel had simply smiled. She never explained where they had gone. Lauren never asked. Now, she finally understood. Every lawyer's appointment. Every signed document. Every quiet afternoon. Rachel had protected their grandfather's privacy. She had never used it against anyone. Eric suddenly slammed the papers closed. I don't care whose name is on some document. We've lived here for years. You can't just throw us out. Jonathan nodded. Ordinarily, you would be correct. But this agreement contains specific conditions. He turned to a highlighted section. Condition 7. Lauren slowly read the words aloud. Occupancy shall immediately terminate if either occupant commits physical violence, harassment, intimidation, or abusive conduct toward Rachel Bennett. Her voice broke. She looked at Eric. He snatched the papers away. This proves nothing. Jonathan calmly removed another folder. It does when supported by evidence. Eric folded his arms. What evidence? Jonathan handed him the file. Inside were signed witness statements. Aunt Susan. Uncle David. 3 cousins. Rachel's younger brother. Every statement described exactly the same event. Rachel accidentally dropped the cake. Eric slapped her. Lauren demanded Rachel apologize. Rachel left alone. Nobody claimed Rachel had acted aggressively. Eric's confidence vanished. This is insane. He pulled out his phone. I'll call everyone. They'll tell you what really happened. He immediately called Uncle David. The phone rang twice. David answered. David. Tell this lawyer Rachel's lying. There was a long silence. Then David quietly replied. No. I won't. You hit her. The call ended. Eric stared at the screen. He quickly dialed Aunt Susan. She answered immediately. Before Eric could speak, she said only one sentence. You should have never touched her. Then she hung up. Eric's jaw tightened. He called another cousin. No answer. Another. Straight to voicemail. Rachel's younger brother answered. Michael. Tell these people they're wrong. Michael's voice sounded disappointed. They're not wrong. I watched you slap my sister. I should have stopped you. I'm done pretending you did nothing. The line went dead. One by one. Every person who had remained silent at the birthday party found the courage they hadn't shown earlier. Eric slowly lowered his phone. For the first time in years. No one was protecting him. Lauren sank onto the front steps. Tears rolled down her face. I told her to leave. She whispered. The memory replayed in her mind. Rachel standing alone. One hand covering her swollen cheek. Looking directly at her sister. Waiting. Hoping. Receiving nothing. Lauren buried her face in her hands. What have I done? Jonathan looked at her sympathetically. Miss Bennet made no threats. She simply instructed our office to enforce the agreement your grandfather created. Eric stared at the front door. His anger slowly turned into fear. For the first time. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like someone else's property. Because legally, it was. He took one step toward the porch. I'm going inside. Before he reached the door, the locksmith quietly walked forward. He removed a brand new lock cylinder from his toolbox. Within seconds, the old lock was gone. A metallic click echoed across the silent street. Eric stopped walking. He stared at the door. Speechless. The sound of the new lock turning into place was louder than anything anyone could have said. And deep inside the house, on the dining room wall, a framed photograph of William Bennet seemed to watch over everything. As if he had known this day would eventually come. The sound of the locksmith's tools echoed through the quiet neighborhood. No one spoke. Eric stood frozen on the walkway, staring at the front door. His hands were clenched into fists. His face had turned pale. For several long seconds. He couldn't find a single word. Finally, he looked at Jonathan. This is because of one mistake? Jonathan calmly closed his briefcase. No. This is because of years of behavior. Eric frowned. What does that mean? Jonathan removed one final folder. This explanation was written by your grandfather. He instructed our office to reveal it only if the occupancy agreement ever had to be enforced. Lauren slowly stood. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Jonathan opened the folder. William Bennet stated that Rachel consistently cared for him during the final years of his life. He continued reading. She drove me to every doctor's appointment. She organized my medications. She repaired things around the house before I even had to ask. When I was lonely, she simply sat with me. Lauren lowered her head. Every sentence reminded her of moments she had ignored. Jonathan continued. My older granddaughter loved me. I never doubted that. But love without responsibility cannot build a home. Lauren covered her mouth. Tears rolled down her cheeks again. Jonathan looked at Eric. Your grandfather also wrote something specifically about you. Eric remained silent. Jonathan read directly from the document. I have witnessed Eric's temper on more than one occasion. He often mistakes control for leadership. I fear that one day Rachel will become the target of his anger. If that day ever comes, I want her protected. Eric looked away. For the first time. He couldn't deny it. Lauren whispered. Grandpa knew. Jonathan nodded. He hoped he was wrong. But he prepared anyway. Silence settled over the driveway. A cool evening breeze moved through the trees. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Eric let out a frustrated laugh. So Rachel wins. Jonathan looked directly into his eyes. This isn't about winning. It's about consequences. Eric shook his head. She wanted revenge. Jonathan answered immediately. No. If revenge had been her goal, she could have enforced this agreement months ago. Eric frowned. What? Jonathan opened another page. Your grandfather transferred ownership almost 7 months ago. Rachel had the legal authority from the beginning. She chose not to use it. Lauren looked shocked. She never told us. No. Jonathan replied. She believed your grandfather wanted the family to stay together. Lauren closed her eyes. Rachel had protected them. Even after years of disrespect. Even after countless insults. Even after never being appreciated. Jonathan continued. Today's assault activated the one condition your grandfather considered non-negotiable. He believed no one should ever remain in a place where they are abused. Those words settled heavily over everyone. Eric slowly sat on the front steps beside Lauren. The confidence that had followed him for years had completely disappeared. His voice became quiet. I never thought she'd actually do this. Jonathan gently corrected him. She didn't. Eric looked confused. What? You made the decision. The moment you raised your hand. You chose your actions. Rachel simply chose to stop accepting them. Eric had no answer. His shoulders dropped. For the first time, he realized something painful. Every cruel joke. Every insult. Every moment Rachel had stayed silent. He had mistaken for permission. He believed there would never be consequences. He had been wrong. Lauren slowly pulled out her phone. She stared at Rachel's name on the screen. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Jonathan quietly stepped back to give her privacy. She finally pressed it. The phone rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then voicemail. Lauren swallowed hard. Rachel. Her voice immediately broke. I'm not calling to ask you to change your mind. You have every right. She paused, struggling to breathe. I'm sorry. I watched him hurt you. And instead of standing beside my little sister, I stood beside my husband. I told myself I was keeping peace. But I wasn't. I was protecting the wrong person. Another long pause. You deserved a sister that day. I wasn't one. I don't expect forgiveness. I only wanted you to know. You were never the problem. She ended the voicemail. Tears rolled freely down her face. Eric quietly listened. He had never heard Lauren speak like that before. Not once in their marriage. Jonathan walked back toward them. The moving schedule is outlined inside the notice. You'll have 14 days to remove your belongings. Our office will coordinate everything. Eric nodded slowly. There was no anger left. Only regret. As Jonathan turned toward his car, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. A small smile appeared on his face. Lauren noticed. Is everything all right? Jonathan looked at her. I've just received confirmation. Miss Bennett has instructed us to provide additional assistance. Lauren looked confused. What kind of assistance? Jonathan replied calmly. She requested that your children be allowed to keep all of their bedroom furniture. She also asked that moving expenses be paid from her own account. Lauren stared at him in disbelief. After everything that happened today? Jonathan nodded. She said. The children did nothing wrong. Lauren covered her face. She began crying harder than before. Even now, Rachel was thinking about everyone except herself. Jonathan quietly entered his car. As the vehicles pulled away, Lauren remained sitting on the front steps, watching the taillights disappear into the night. For the first time in many years, she understood exactly what kind of sister she had almost lost forever. The next 2 weeks passed more quietly than anyone. Expected. There were no shouting matches. No courtroom drama. No angry confrontations. Everything happened exactly as the occupancy agreement required. Jonathan Hayes handled every legal detail with professionalism. Moving trucks arrived on schedule. Boxes were packed. Furniture was carefully loaded. By the 14th day, Lauren and Eric handed over the last set of keys. Before leaving, Lauren stood on the front porch for a long moment. She looked at the flower beds her grandfather had loved. The old wooden swing beneath the maple tree. The wind chime hanging near the front door. She remembered being a little girl, running across the yard while her grandfather laughed from the porch. Then she remembered Rachel. Rachel had protected those memories for years, while everyone else had been too busy living their own lives. Lauren quietly whispered, "I'm sorry, Grandpa." No one heard her except the breeze. Word spread through the family faster than anyone expected. Everyone eventually learned the truth. The house had never belonged to Lauren. Rachel had never lied. She had never manipulated anyone. She had simply honored her grandfather's wishes. One by one, family members began calling Rachel. Aunt Susan apologized. "I should have spoken the moment Eric raised his voice." Rachel thanked her. Uncle David admitted he had ignored too many warning signs. Rachel thanked him too. Several cousins confessed they had laughed at Eric's jokes because it was easier than confronting him. Rachel didn't argue. She simply said, "I hope next time you choose courage instead of comfort." Those words stayed with them. As for Eric, things changed quickly. People stopped inviting him to family gatherings. When he made sarcastic comments, nobody laughed anymore. When he blamed Rachel, nobody agreed. The image of him striking her in front of a room full of witnesses had changed everything. For years, he had controlled every conversation with confidence. Now, the silence around him was louder than any argument. One evening, about a month later, Lauren asked Rachel if they could meet. Rachel thought about it for several days before finally agreeing. They met at a small park where they had played together as children. Lauren arrived first. She looked different. Not because of her clothes. Because the confidence she once borrowed from Eric was gone. When Rachel walked over, neither sister spoke for several seconds. Finally, Lauren stood. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Rachel answered honestly. "I almost didn't." Lauren nodded. "I understand." Another long silence followed. Then Lauren reached into her purse. She placed a folded envelope on the table. Rachel looked at it. "What's this?" Lauren smiled sadly. "The money." Rachel frowned. "What money?" Lauren lowered her eyes. "For the birthday cake. And every other time I promised I'd pay you back." Rachel slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check, along with a handwritten list. Birthday cakes, school supplies, Christmas presents, utility bills, babysitting, gas money. The total covered nearly 10 years. Rachel looked up. "You kept track?" Lauren shook her head. "No. You did. I found one of your old notebooks while packing." Rachel smiled softly. "I never wrote it down because I expected repayment. I only needed to remember my monthly budget." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "I spent years believing you helped because you had nothing better to do. I never realized how much you sacrificed." Rachel quietly folded the paper. "You don't owe me this." Lauren answered. "Maybe not. But I owe myself the chance to become a better person." Rachel looked at her sister for a long time. Then she gently pushed the check back across the table. "I won't take your money." Lauren looked confused. "But..." Rachel smiled. If you're serious about changing, use it for your children. Teach them something we forgot growing up. Lauren whispered. What's that? Rachel looked directly into her sister's eyes. That love without respect isn't really love. Lauren broke down crying. This time, Rachel didn't walk away. She stepped forward and hugged her. Not because everything had been forgiven, but because forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. She could forgive. Trust would have to be earned. Months passed. Autumn arrived. Rachel finally moved into the house her grandfather had left her. She didn't erase his memory. She honored it. She repaired the old porch railing they had talked about fixing together. She planted fresh white roses beneath the front window because they had been his favorite flowers. She repainted the living room the soft cream color he had once chosen from a paint catalog but never had the chance to use. Every corner of the house slowly became peaceful again. Not because it was perfect. Because it was safe. Rachel also changed in ways no one expected. She stopped apologizing for having boundaries. She no longer said yes to every favor. If someone treated her with kindness, she gladly helped. If they treated her with disrespect, she quietly walked away. Without guilt. Without explaining herself. The following summer, Rachel hosted another family barbecue. The same backyard. The same picnic tables. The same maple tree. But this gathering felt completely different. Children laughed freely. Nobody mocked anyone. Conversations were warm. People listened when others spoke. Respect had replaced fear. As the sun began to set, Aunt Susan handed Rachel a plate of grilled vegetables. She smiled. Your grandfather would have loved today. Rachel looked around the yard. At the flowers blooming near the porch. At the children chasing bubbles across the grass. At the family members who had finally learned the value of speaking up. Then she looked toward the empty rocking chair where her grandfather used to sit every evening. A gentle breeze moved through the garden. For just a moment. It felt as though he were still there. Watching quietly. Proud of the woman she had become. Rachel smiled. Walking away from that birthday party hadn't been the day she lost her family. It had been the day she stopped accepting a version of family that demanded her silence. Because real family doesn't ask you to sacrifice your dignity to keep the peace. Real family protects you. And the greatest inheritance her grandfather left behind was never the house. It was the courage to finally choose herself.